For those that don't know much about Congressman Steube, he represents the Florida's 17th district in Congress. From 2010 to 2018, Congressman Steube used his background in the military, agriculture, and law to advance conservative values as a member of the Florida House of Representatives and Florida Senate. In Congress, Steube continues to champion these issues while serving in the House Judiciary, Oversight and Reform, and Veterans Affairs committees. Steube's passion for public service began shortly after the September 11th attacks. In his response to this tragedy, the Congressman answered his call of duty by enlisting in the U.S. Army. He served as a commissioned airborne infantry officer and a JAG Corps officer as a captain with the 25th Infantry Division in Operation Iraqi Freedom. Steube is a fifth-generation Floridian and earned his undergraduate and law degree from the best university in the state, of University of Florida.
That's right.
Majoring in beef cattle sciences and minoring in agricultural law. He resides in Sarasota with his wife Jennifer and son Ethan. Florida's 17th district covers all of Charlotte, DeSoto, Glades, Hardy, Highlands, and Okeechobee counties, as well as parts of Sarasota, Lee, and Polk County. Again, Congressman Steube, thank you for taking the time, and thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for that intro. What I'd like to do is just what's interesting about this and the challenges that we face today is what is happening in the federal government and the state government is changing almost hourly sometimes. So what I'd like to do is kind of tell everybody where we're at right now, and then kind of give an overview of some of the different things that we're in the latest phase that Congress passed, and then I'm happy to open it up to some questions. So I'll give some high-level overview first. As of today, and we started getting emails this morning from leadership, it sounds like we're close to a deal between the administration, Speaker Pelosi, and Mitch McConnell on I guess what would be, now they're calling a phase 3.5, not a phase 4, but a phase 3.5. 2 weeks ago, the president wanted a clean reauthorization of the money that would go to the PPP SBA loans. That was the loans that would reimburse small businesses under 500 employees, that if they kept employees on during that time, it would reimburse them for those amounts. As I'm sure most of you are aware, that money went out last Thursday. They ran out of money. The week prior to that, the president tried to get a clean reauthorization, but Schumer in the Senate and Speaker Pelosi blocked him because they wanted other things in the legislation. The president was trying to just do a clean reauthorization quickly so that there'd be more money in that pot, because they knew it was going to run out of money, and then it ran out of money. So I know that a big portion of that will be that. Right now we're hearing 4 o'clock today, maybe the Senate will pass something, but as we sit here today, as we sit here right now, I don't have language of what's been agreed upon. So that tells me that they're still working through the details. So if it passes through the Senate this afternoon or Wednesday, this morning we had gotten notification through the House that we would be expected to vote on this package on Thursday, but again, that's a tentative. So at this point, I'm currently planning on traveling to Washington to vote. They do expect it to be a recorded vote and not a voice vote like what happened the last time. And if somebody has a question about the process of that, I'm happy to get into it. But that's kind of where we are. I anticipate in this upcoming package that we should vote on Thursday, there will be about a $250 billion additional in the PPP loans for small businesses. That would bring the total amount for that line item to $600 billion total, because there was $350 billion in phase 3 that was allocated. I also anticipate some money for hospitals in there. And I also anticipate between 60 and 80 billion specifically for community banks in rural areas. That is something that had been talked about in our leadership circles as something to go specifically to community banks in rural communities. So obviously my district is heavily rural. I have 9 counties, 7 of which are considered rural counties that those community banks could draw down from that 60 to 80 billion. So it'd be 60 to 80 billion on top of the 250 billion for PPP loans, but that would be specific for community banks. That's what I anticipate seeing. Obviously we don't know because it's not out yet, but I think that's kind of what we see this week. I want to go through the parts of what was in phase 3. Obviously, you've probably heard about the Paycheck Protection Program. There was $350 billion that were made in the form of loans, but the loan was designed to provide a direct incentive for small businesses to keep their workers on the payroll. and SBA would forgive those loans if all employees are kept on the payroll for 8 weeks and the money is used for payroll, rent, mortgage, interest, or utilities. I've heard from some businesses where they did it through their bank and 4 days later the money was in their bank account. I've heard from others where they filled out the application and then the banks have told them that the money's gone. So there's a lot of different information I'm getting from constituents, but that was what the program was for. The reason why they wanted the private banking industry to allocate the resources and not have to go through SBA was because SBA it would have taken you months to go through that process instead of having privately run your bank, whoever you bank with, to roll that out. So there was $350 billion in that. As I said previously, that funding ran out last week, and we've been negotiating to try to get that money back. And I anticipate sometime this week, probably Thursday, that we'll vote on that. Part of the phase 3 also included an individual tax rebate. We had a Zoom call this morning with Okeechobee, and I've heard directly from people in Okeechobee they've already gotten their direct rebates. Some people still haven't gotten them. We have gotten quite a few calls about when that's going to happen. If you made under 75K last year or a couple together under 150, you'll get $1,200 direct deposited if that's how you get your tax rebate in either 18 or 19, or they're going to send you a check. Those should be going out. Like I said, I've heard from some people that have received them and some that have not. I would anticipate that most will get that this week, if at the latest sometime next week. But that was part of the $2.2 trillion phase 3. Also included in that were unemployment benefits. There's $250 billion for unemployment compensation. That would compensate individuals who were let go because of coronavirus. And one of the challenges that we saw as that rolled out was the federal government, we allocate the resources and the state administers the program. And there, I'm sure you read in the newspaper or heard on the news that there was a lot of challenges as it relates to the state unemployment compensation system. What I've encouraged people to do is reach out to your state house member or your state senator, because that is a state-run program. We allocate the dollars. So we've been routing callers that have having been problems with the unemployment compensation program to their state representatives. It seems as though that has gotten better. I know initially the website crashed and then they were sending out paper applications. Governor DeSantis fired or moved the person that was in charge of that somewhere else and put somebody else there. So I think a lot of that is working. But if you are unemployed or you know somebody that is encouraged and they haven't gotten through that process and that application process, encourage them to reach out to their state leader. Obviously, Highlands County in my district has a very large ag constituency. I am the #1 citrus producing congressional district in the entire country. So I'm going to touch on quickly some of the things that were in the CARES Act phase 3 specifically for agriculture. There was $35 billion that was set aside in the $2.2 trillion specifically to help farmers, ranchers, and food suppliers. President Trump signed the legislation into law, but USDA is still finalizing the money. I had a conference call with Secretary Perdue, the USDA secretary, last week, who said that he's putting together, talking to the different industries, so cattle, citrus, dairy, what their specific requests and needs are, and then he's coming up with a plan. He's going to present that to the president. I thought he was going to do it last week. Maybe he did, and we don't know about it. It hasn't been made public yet. But as soon as the president approves that plan, he's going to make that public. I anticipate that our dairy farmers in Florida, our cattle ranchers in Florida, and our citrus growers, in addition to be able to take advantage of the PPP Paycheck Protection Program through SBA if they want, they are also going to get some funding through this $35 billion and through USDA. So I anticipate that this week or next week. And here's a breakdown of some additional funding that was in there. There's $9.5 billion to the USDA Office of Secretary for Emergency Response Funding, specifically to support ag producers impacted by COVID-19. That includes specialty crops and producers that supply local food systems and livestock producers. There was an additional $145.5 million for rural development to provide much needed financing to business owners that might not be able to qualify for loans on their own. That's called the Reconnect Pilot Grant Programs. $5.6 billion for the food and nutritional service to help ensure that individuals get food from farms and people gets it to their plates. And it also replenished the Commodity Credit Corporation borrowing authority to $14 billion. That's kind of a very high level recap of the phase 3 legislation. As far as the state, kind of want to just talk about what's going on at the state level. Obviously, Governor DeSantis has done a stay-at-home order to the end of April. I am optimistic. So every day, and I'm going to go through the numbers here in a second, but every day I get the numbers of new reported cases and deaths in each one of the 9 counties I represent. And I am seeing a daily trend downward. We had 10 deaths in my district yesterday, which was a spike in deaths. But if you look at the number of new cases, all of the new cases are trending down. The day before yesterday, we had 65, and today we only had like 13. So you're seeing that curve flatten out and you're seeing that trend down. So that, to me, is a very good sign. So I'm hopeful that Governor DeSantis will keep the stay-at-home order till the end of April, and things can start to get slowly back to normal at the beginning of May. I think that's probably what he's going to end up doing, but again, that's a decision that the governor gets to make. If you have questions about what are essential businesses and what aren't essential businesses, you can go to www.floridadisaster.org. When the governor issued his list of what was essential and not essential, my phone didn't stop ringing from business owners trying to figure out whether they were essential or not, if they could still operate their companies or businesses or not. That's kind of slowed down too, so that everybody seems to have a pretty good handle of that part of his order. He also issued a statewide executive order suspending mortgage foreclosures and rent payments for 45 days. And he's also issued an executive order waiving taxes on loans issued to small businesses under the CARES Act. So also in the very beginning, as soon as I got back from DC, one of the first things I did was reach out to all of my local hospital CEOs in the district and all of my different county medical offices to find out what they needed and make sure that they had all the resources they needed. Early in the pandemic, obviously, them getting testing kits, testing swabs, PPE, face masks, and face shields were a real challenge. I worked with the Vice President's task force and then worked with Jared Moskowitz, who's the Director of Emergency Management for the state, to ensure that all of our hospitals got all the PPE that they need. That seems to have solidified itself. It seems like everybody has, from the hospital perspective, the things that they need and are getting it in a timely manner if they're behind. As of yesterday at 4 p.m., there is a total of 26,660 cases in Florida with 789 deaths. Highlands County has 70 total cases and 6 deaths. To give you an idea of some of the other counties, I'll go through some of my other counties. I've got Glades has 5 total cases, 1 death. Okeechobee has 7 cases and 0 deaths. Hardy County has 4 cases and 0 deaths. Your bigger, more populous counties obviously are heavily hit. Lee County has 779 cases with 27 deaths. Sarasota County has 289 cases with 24 deaths. Polk County has 333 cases with 12 deaths. Charlotte County has 139 cases with 9 deaths. And DeSoto County has 24 cases with 4 deaths. There's a couple of other agriculture specific related things that the governor's office has done. On March 16th, he activated the Florida Emergency Bridge Loan Program for small businesses, but that also allows farmers, ranchers, and food producers to be able to apply for that at the state level. Also, small businesses, including ag producers that have between 2 and 100 employees that were established prior to March 9th of 2020, that can demonstrate an economic impact from COVID-19, can also apply to receive a short-term interest-free loan of up to $50,000 for a year. Up to $50 million will be made available for this loan program. Again, that's at the state level. If you're interested in that, you can contact disaster@floridasbdc.org. And one thing I'll say quickly before I get to the next couple of issues is, if you want to stay updated on what's going on federally at the state level in the district, please follow me on Facebook or on Twitter. It's /Rep Greg Steube. We're constantly putting up interviews, information, what's going on there. So if you want to stay in touch with what is going on, please follow us on Facebook at /Rep Greg Steube. So the president has talked a lot about trying to reopen the economy and what that's going to look like. There's several phases of that as we work through opening things up. He hasn't made a decision on the timing yet. He's given all the different state governors the decision to do what they want in their state, which I think is appropriate given the structure of our government and the federalist style of our government, to allow states to decide what's best for them. Last night, the president tweeted that he's doing an all-out halt to immigration in the United States. The order, he tweeted that last night at about 10 o'clock, but the order hasn't been released yet. We're being told that it's not going to affect what producers like citrus producers in Highlands County are seeing through the H2A program. We've also been working with U.S. Department of Ag, Department of Labor, and Department of Homeland Security to make sure that there isn't a disruption to the ag community, especially as it relates to H2A. So I had specifically Secretary Pompeo in the State Department has authorized consulary officers to expand the categories of H2A visa applicants whose applications can be processed without an in-person interview. So we anticipate the vast majority of those qualified H2A workers to not have to be processed with an in-person interview as they have done historically. Secretary Perdue's also been working with the State Department to make all of this happen. And I think you're going to start to see changes that will allow our citrus growers and ranchers who utilize H2A to ensure that they're getting the labor that they need. At the outset of the crisis, I joined with some of my other congressional colleagues in sending several letters to the Department of Homeland Security highlighting the need for expedited review processing for H2A visa applications and offer flexibility in this approval process. And I'm pleased that DHS heeded our request and is moving towards addressing those issues. I would say one of the biggest challenges that I got from citrus growers in Highlands County was the challenges that they were facing with how long it was taking for these H2A approvals and applicants to get approved. So it seems like that has solved itself. That's kind of a high-level overview of what's going on. And at this point, Liz, I'm happy to open it up to any questions.
Fantastic. Okay, so I do have a couple of questions. And first of all, I don't know if I've mentioned this, but if you have a question for Congressman Steube, all you need to do on the bottom of the screen, you'll see a button that says chat. Click that, and then you type the question in there, and I will moderate the questions for you. So, okay, our first question that we have is, let's see here, with reports of large public traded companies acquiring funds with the recent PPP loans, are there any steps being taken with the new round of funds to prevent larger companies from participating so there'll be additional funds for small business?
So when that first phase 3 bill went through, it was supposed to be businesses only affected by COVID-19 and under 500 employees. And with any government program, you're going to have people that are going to try to take advantage of it and be dishonest. So I've seen some of these reports where this is happening. Here's one of the challenges of being a House member out of 435 members of Congress is you're not involved in the details of putting this together. So like the chambers the 501c6s weren't able to take advantage of the first round of phase 3. I sent a letter to Vice President Pence. I sent a letter to the task force and to our leadership trying to make sure that they're included just like any other small business. So we try to put our information of what we want included in these packages, but unfortunately the way these things get negotiated is you have Secretary Mnuchin with the administration negotiating with Mitch McConnell in the Senate and Speaker Pelosi. And so the details we're not privy to. We can obviously express things that we want to see happen. And I certainly don't think that publicly traded companies that obviously have more than 500 employees should be able to take advantage of this that was specifically targeted for small businesses. So I hope that the language in this next phase, I guess 3.5, will address that issue. I think what you're going to see is if there were companies that took advantage of this and weren't supposed to be able to take that, I think you're going to see in a year or so SBA looking at those companies that weren't supposed to take some of this money and trying to claw some of that money back. So I think that's going to be a challenge that they're going to see. But I'm hopeful that that language is going to be included in there. But again, you're not involved in the day-to-day negotiations of that. And as a member of the House, all you get is an up or down vote on the floor. What they've done traditionally is they invoke the rule. And so members can't even file amendments to pieces of legislation on the floor. And I anticipate they're probably going to do the same thing with this. So they don't have members filing amendments, which is unfortunate. That's not the way I think that the process should work. You guys elected me to represent Highlands and the 17th district in Florida and Washington. I should have the ability to file amendments on pieces of legislation. But if they invoke the rule, then we won't have the ability to do that.
Okay, thank you for that. So you may have answered this already, but I'll ask it again. What kind of assistance is the USDA planning to provide to the dairy industry?
So I've had a lot of conversations specifically on dairy. I sent a letter. So I spoke with Secretary Perdue last week, and my specific question to him was, I've been getting calls from dairy farmers in Okeechobee and in my district that are literally dumping truckloads of milk in their pastures. They're not able to sell their product because the schools are shut down. The demand isn't there that normally is there, and the outlets aren't there. Processing isn't there. What's going to be done? And he assured me that in the $9.5 billion that was allocated under CARES in the Phase 3 legislation, that a portion of that will go specifically to Florida dairy farmers. So with Southeast Milk Organization, I got specific numbers from them. We sent a letter to Secretary Perdue allocating and asking the resources to be allocated. He told me last week that he had hoped to have his plan presented to the president last week. So maybe that's happened and hasn't become public yet, or maybe the president hasn't approved it yet. But I'm hopeful in the next week or so that we'll see part of that $9.5 billion go directly to dairy farmers in Florida. And I know for a fact that a portion of that will go there. We don't know that information yet until that plan's approved.
Very good. Okay, so we also have a question here from Jeff King over at the EDC in Highlands County. He said he's glad to hear that specific money is allocated to rural banks and credit unions. Is there any priority for rural areas in any of these programs, or is that a state question?
There was some money allocated in the first CARES Act specifically to go to rural hospitals. And there is going to be money. I mean, we don't know. I don't know exactly what it looks like right now because we don't have the language, but based on reports and what you're hearing people say, it appears there's going to be 60 to 80 billion for rural communities and community banks to take advantage of. So I think there is going to be some. I had a conversation personally with the minority leader, Kevin McCarthy, a couple of days ago, where we talked about some of these issues. And he was hopeful that in this phase bill that would be approved, that there would be specific funding for rural hospitals specifically, because these state orders, especially here in Florida, where they've had to shut down elective procedures, a lot of these hospitals' incomes have plummeted because they rely upon elective procedures, medical procedures to move their budget along. So hopefully there'll be money in that going this year or this next phase.
All right. The next question is, are farm labor contractors eligible for the PPP if their employees are predominantly H2A workers?
So that was a question we had. I did a Florida Farm Bureau call, and that was a question that came up. There's not specific guidance yet from SBA on this. What I have been advising people to do is to include those H2A workers as part of your Paycheck Protection Program application. I would include them. And then let SBA tell them that you can't include that, but they're part of your labor force. They're part of your employees. You're paying them. If you're under the 500 employees as a small business, I absolutely think you should be compensated for that because that's a cost to your business. And so I think that is what was envisioned. There's not specific guidance on that. And when we talk to SBA about that, they're supposed to be putting out guidance on that. So what I've told people is to assume, because you are paying them, they are employees, to include that in your applications.
Very good. Okay. This is an interesting question. How do you anticipate the supply chain changing over the next few years?
That's a great question. I'm actually working on a bill right now. Right before this started, I emailed my legislative assistant who's working on it back. I think you're going to see the supply chain change tremendously. And I think you're going to see a lot of big manufacturing companies come back to the United States. I think what Americans have now realized because of this, all of our medical equipment, protective equipment, masks, face shields, for the majority of which are all manufactured in China. Pharmaceuticals and actually the testing swabs for the COVID-19 testing swabs were all manufactured in Italy. Two places that were hit hard and then weren't sending us PPE and testing swabs and testing kits. And I think you're going to see more manufacturing come back to the United States. I'm working on a bill that would provide tax incentives for manufacturing companies to bring those manufacturing back to the United States. Because I don't know about you, but I feel a heck of a lot more comfortable in a situation like this, having our own manufacturers domestically producing the N95 face masks and the face shields and the PPE for our healthcare workers right here in the United States, and not be reliant upon a foreign government. Globalization works great if all of us aren't shut down and all of us are trading with each other and there's not some type of national security issue. When you have a shutdown like this, obviously countries are going to be protecting themselves first. And if we're getting all of our pharmaceuticals and all of our personal protective equipment from overseas countries and we don't actually have it here, it presents an incredible challenge to us. That was the biggest challenge in the beginning, was getting enough PPE for our healthcare workers, and then for people that just wanted to wear face masks when they went to Publix or the supermarket. So I think you're actually going to see the supply chains change pretty drastically. I think you're going to see manufacturing come back to the United States. we're going to file a bill that would incentivize through tax incentives manufacturing companies to come back to the United States. Because I don't know about you, but I certainly would want, in a situation like this, us to be able as a country to rely upon our own domestic manufacturing of pharmaceuticals and medical equipment.
Very good. Okay. Another question that we have, which is a great question, will nonprofits, the 501c3s, still be continuing in the 3.5 according to the current draft?
They should be, because they were included in the first. I would 100% assume that they would also be included in this next bill that should be passed this week. Yes.
Okay, very good. And I just got a note from our SBDC rep who is on the call here today. He said in the question regarding the H2A, he says the banks have to make the interpretation on whether or not those employees can apply for the PPP, because the SBA has not given specific guidance. So it's up to the bank.
Good deal.
Do we have any additional questions? As of right now, that is all of them. If you have any, please type those in. In the meantime, since we've got, let's see. Oh, we've got one here. Do you think that there will now be a precedent set for future virus outbreaks? Do you think that the government will just shut things down quicker? What do you think will happen in the future?
When the dust has settled from all this and we look back on numbers and reactions, because you have 50 different states who have all handled it differently because of the different, like my son lives in Michigan and his governor has been much more aggressive in their stay-at-home orders. She just recently ordered that families can't even come together. You've seen people being arrested for surfing in California. There was an interview I saw of the New Jersey governor where they're arresting people at a synagogue for worshiping in New Jersey, but allowing people to go to liquor stores. So you're going to have a lot of different things to look at once this is all over as to what worked and what didn't work. I think what's interesting is to look at countries like Sweden, who didn't shut down their economy at all. And if you look at numbers of spread in cases and deaths, they're not much different than other countries that completely shut down their economies and shut down all the different facets of their country. So I think when this all settles and we kind of see how different countries and different states handled it, we'll have a lot of data to make better, more informed decisions moving forward. So it'll be interesting to see, once we have all that information, what worked and what didn't work. I'm hopeful that we get people back to work. I was on a call yesterday with a 3-star general who spent a lot of time in China, that the information that we were getting from China is not accurate. They doubled the amount of people that died. It went up by like 50% when they were updating their numbers. So it's believed that there was actually millions of people that were actually infected in China and they weren't telling us. There's a lot of belief, and there was a study in California that they did antibody testing where it actually showed there were much more people that were actually infected that had antibodies, and they were completely asymptomatic, so they never went to get tested because they weren't sick. So if you look at the numbers, taking them into account, the death rate, the mortality rate is much, much lower than it would be compared to what we're seeing now with the numbers that we're seeing of people actually getting tested, because there's a lot of other people that were infected that didn't die or have symptoms or get sick. So I think as information comes out, it'll help us make these decisions in the future. But I'm hopeful that we can reopen the economy soon as we've seen these numbers go down.
All right, we've got a couple other questions here. Have some banks done better than others in interpreting the rules or following through with the grants? And is there any particular guidance? And I think I have a little bit of background with this. There's been some organizations that have applied right when the PPP rolled out, and then when the time came, found out that their applications were never submitted or things along those lines. And I've heard that from a couple of different businesses in our area here. So are there any future guidelines for the banks or anything that you see coming through the pipeline?
It is definitely different depending on who you bank with. Because I would hear, like I was telling you an example, and I don't want to name banks and different organizations, but one individual applied and 4 days later he got his money. He was with one bank, and then there was a individual that contacted me. He was with a different bank, and they were capped with the amount that they could do. And then you don't know if what the banks are telling you is accurate, because if they're not making enough money to do the loans, they may be just internally deciding not to do the loans. And then the other challenge with that was, in the law, it was thought of as it would be faster for people to get the money if they did it through the bank that they currently bank with. Well, if you're with one of those banks that decided or that was capped and couldn't do anymore, then they were sending you to a different bank. But the way that the legislation was written was the bank had to deal with their customers first before they would take applications from non-existing customers. So that was a challenge that we've seen, and it was very bank dependent. Some banks were very good and very flexible with getting it through the process, and some weren't. So I think that's something that, as this new phase rolls out, hopefully is being taken into consideration, as there were quite a few people. There was a handful of people that I talked to that actually had gone through the application process with their bank, and then by the time it was submitted, the money was gone. So hopefully when this new allocation of funds comes through, those will be some of the first disbursements that will come through to some of those small businesses. But it was very bank dependent.
Okay, very good. How do small businesses work with local lenders that are choosing to lend outside the SBA guidelines? For example, allocating payroll funds and not multiplying the 2.5.
Yeah, again, I guess it's up to individual institutions as to how they want to handle that. Certainly what we've backed from the federal government is the SBA loans. There are other, like I saw a report yesterday where Shake Shack returned the $10 million that they had gotten through it because they were able to get lending through another source. So hopefully if you can find lending in other sources, like in the beginning I talked about some of those state programs where there's some money, that you can take advantage of those if those are beneficial to your business.
Okay, I've got an additional question here. For small businesses that previously applied for relief in the first round of the PPP, will they have to apply again? I'm waiting to hear confirmation of exactly what she means by that, but I think what she's referring to is if they got funding in the first round, are they eligible to apply again?
If they got, well, if you have an SBA number, if what they're asking is if they haven't gotten the money and they went through the process, are they going to have to reapply? If you have that SBA number through the application process, you're not going to have to redo that again. If you got your money on the first time, will you get it on the second time? I think will depend on whether you won't be able to get an additional 8 weeks. So if you have other employees that weren't accounted for the first time that you kept on, I would imagine you should get funding for that, but you're not going to get paid twice for the same 8-week period.
Okay, that makes sense. So if someone was not funded, would they have to apply again? Is that going to depend on whether or not they have that SBA number?
If you have that SBA number, you shouldn't have to apply again. Your bank that you're working with should be able to submit your application with the SBA number that you had in that first application.
Okay, so if they do not have an SBA number, they're basically starting from scratch here. Is that correct?
I would talk to your financial institution. They should be able to pick up from the documents where they left off. But until you get that SBA number, the application hasn't been processed through the SBA.
Okay. All right. Do we have any additional questions today? I believe that is the end of them for now. I just want to say thank you so much, Congressman Steube. You have been fantastic in keeping our members and our community informed. We appreciate you very, very much.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. I know that you have a big call to be on, so you are welcome to skedaddle out of here if you need to. I do also want to open it up, since we do have Dusty that's here as our sponsor for Johnson Stuyvesant. If you guys have any market questions, you are welcome to ask them of him now if you're interested in anything along those lines with that, because who knows, since we have a pro here, we might as well utilize him. Anybody? Crickets? Well, if not, contact us at the chamber. We'll make sure we get you in contact with Johnson Stuyvesant in case you want to do any additional questions or specific questions for him. Does that sound like a plan to everybody? All right. Well, thank you very much today for everybody being here. I do appreciate that very much. Hopefully soon we will have our next chamber luncheon coming up, so we will have another chance for us to correspond with one another. So I appreciate everybody being here. You guys have a great day.